Welcome to the serialized version of my book, You're the Last Person I Thought Could Quit Smoking. I hope you'll use it to finally stop killing yourself with cigarettes. Watch all the chapters and learn why and how I quit after 45 years of loving to smoke a lot. Smoking triggers. Habitual moments which create an irresistible Pavlovian drive to light up. You can also describe them as any excuse to smoke. I would have to deal with all my triggers if I had any hope of quitting, which would be a hell of a task because after close to 5 decades of smoking, I had more triggers than an army arsenal. The trigger concept was the aha moment for me when I was trying to figure out how I was going to give up smoking with the least amount of stress for myself. I started to analyze the ways that I signaled myself to light up when certain things happened. Found a lot of times that it was more or less automatic for me to have a cigarette in my hand in order to feel right. One of the most obvious to me was when I answered the phone or initiated a call. It was a mandatory to light up and puff every time. Once I began to analyze my behavior, I found many more scenarios that resulted in my wanting a cigarette without fail. After eating anything, with coffee, and on and on. Eventually I realized that anything I did could warrant my lighting up a cigarette. And anything I did regularly was guaranteed to initiate smoking every time I did it. Anytime I got in the car to drive somewhere, I had to smoke a cigarette to get off on the right foot. When I thought about it, I was disgusted with myself for being such a creature of habit. And I really got upset when I thought of the tobacco companies laughing at my weakness and profiting every time I lit up and shortened my own life willingly by sucking down more of their poison. Boy, if I ever needed motivation, that was an image I could use. One that I found difficult to change was that first cigarette in the morning. I was in the habit of lighting that first smoke as I was getting out of bed on my way to the bathroom. This was a tough one for me, and at first I was only able to move it down the line a little while, like until the coffee was ready. And that was a major move at the time. But eventually I was able to go for an hour or more in the morning without that first cigarette, and I realized that this was a giant step to being able to quit. After all, I thought, there was not a lot of difference between waiting an hour and waiting all day for the first smoke after being asleep for 6 or 8 hours. And that told me that I could have a good chance at success without driving myself crazy once I fooled myself into thinking that I could go just a little longer between smokes until the gap was so long that I might forget sometimes for even longer than I wanted to. That was an epiphany. When I first realized that I had distanced myself far enough between smokes to diffuse my desire to the point of forgetting, albeit just for a little longer than I had planned, my usual overwhelming craving for more nicotine. I knew there was a way for me to do this without the punishing feeling of deprivation. I had actually forgotten to want a cigarette for the first time since I was in high school, more than 40 years ago. Maybe there was hope for me yet. I would build my system for quitting around the trigger concept. It was the one thing about smoking that gave me the most angst about quitting. I was dedicated to those moments in my life when I knew I would need to smoke. Proving to myself that I did not have to smoke, even for a while, proved to me that I could go without it forever. This was the real turning point, the time when I knew in my heart that I could do this without going stark raving mad. I could actually see myself as a non-smoker for the first time in over 45 years. Talk about a revolution. I started with the triggers that would be easiest for me to work on. After evaluating yourself, your state of mind, and doing your own self-audit, an objective, I've never been so honest with myself kind of audit, you may discover that your trigger priorities are vastly different than mine, but that's the way it should be. Hell, you need to congratulate yourself for getting to the point that you're actually sorting out this difficult phase of your life. My brain was programmed to put my, hey, you need a cigarette right now, sequence into effect immediately whenever I pulled the trigger. If for whatever reason I couldn't carry out the command, I would do it as soon as possible because my brain would not let me deprive myself of the pleasure and satisfaction I got when I sucked that smoke into my lungs. The addictive nicotine entered my bloodstream and then rushed to my receptors. It was good, and no one was going to tell me otherwise. For me, it was like the song Heroin by the Velvet Underground. Even if you've never heard it, the title tells you what it's about. My smoking addiction was defined by a line from a song, a demon in disguise. Triggers had to be dealt with if I had any chance in hell of quitting. I started slow to give myself a better chance of success. This was a battle against an enemy that established itself over 40 years ago, and victory over it, over myself, would be incremental. If I could push back, even by a moment, the inevitable lighting up, I could make actual progress. It was hard, as I knew it would be. I started with the phone. I told myself that I could have that cig, but I had to wait just a while, not too long at first. but long enough that with every opportunity I would build in more and more of a delay in the pulling of that specific trigger and the let's light up sequence. It was hard, really, really hard. It was also smart, even though I had only picked the phone trigger because it presented so many opportunities to try and make this work. Unless you're blessed with a lifestyle that's off the grid, you're on the phone either to an extent that you wish you could disconnect, or the phone and its connections are something you enjoy. Regardless, as a trigger to have a smoke, the phone is a common denominator for smokers. That's what made it a smart first step, because it offered plenty of opportunities to try the delay process, kind of like getting a bunch of practice throws or taking multiple review tests that kind of give you the answers. Eventually, I could put it off having a cigarette for several minutes and actually not have the thought about having one before I thought of it again and finally lit up rewarding myself. Ultimately, I went for longer and longer periods before finally having my cigarette. This is the core concept that led to my ultimate victory. It can be yours too. Stretch those intervals out longer and longer until the trigger no longer exists, where you don't associate the event with lighting up. Once I achieved this, it was like magic, because I realized if I could delay that moment for as long as I wanted, then I could delay it forever. There's really no difference between an hour or two without a cigarette and forever without one. It might seem impossible now, but believe me, if I could do it, and I did, you can do it too. The concept of stretching time is the next primary technique I developed, lengthening the time between cigs that I did smoke, which reduced my overall intake. I began by testing myself, seeing how long I could go without smoking. I stretched time between cigarettes to the point of several hours, but more importantly, I could go for those hours without even thinking about smoking. That was both a revelation and something of which I could be proud. I was finally proving to myself that I could survive being awake and for prolonged periods of time not have the irresistible need to smoke. That was a game changer for me, and it will be for you too. I expanded the stretching time concept, sorry, the pun is unintentional, by setting a schedule, with some but not much wiggle room, of when I would smoke with a set number of cigarettes every day. I began with the most obvious or easy segment for me, the morning, because, as with the phone trigger, early and easy success would give me the drive and reward to build my confidence. For my entire adult life, I began each day, right out of sleep, with a cigarette, so it was an easy, obvious starting point. This is a good place to remind yourself that the easy success in these beginnings can be seductive. The wiggle room aspect of easing into these early attempts is a temporary, not permanent helper. Don't linger in the early wiggle room periods too long. You're not trying to cut down, you're trying to quit altogether. Eventually, I limited my scheduled smoking time to 1 cigarette per hour, which brought my consumption down to less than a pack a day, unless I had an unusual day where I was awake more than 20 hours. That's not impossible in the music business, but it's gotten rarer as I've gotten older. I also began to parse my smoking to only a few drags at a time, so that the 1 cig would provide me with 2 or more sessions of 1 or 2 drags per hour. I pretended that this was just like having 2 cigs or more. Lame, I know, but a junkie will try anything, especially if it means he can have more of what he craves. Who knew that quitting could actually involve clever math and psychology? I reached a point where I never smoked an entire cigarette at one sitting, ever. This also served to slowly wean my body off the nicotine and the other elements my system had not just come to expect, and which had, in a very real sense, become a critical element of my physical and mental functionality. Day by day, my body and mind began to become my own property again. I now own myself free and clear. It's been 3 years and counting without so much as a drag on a cigarette. I won't dare lie or mislead you in any way. It was hard, and even as I detoxed, I did think about smoking more. But I always reminded myself that I really wanted to do this, and I was not going to give in no matter what. It's a challenge, and you must be hard on yourself when you slack off or give in to the temptation to break your own rules. It's much too easy to pretend that you will make up for it later. You won't, so don't bullshit a bullshitter. You must be able to recognize when you're kidding yourself, or you will quickly lose sight of your long-term goal. I don't want that to happen. You don't want that to happen, and the people around you don't want that to happen. Remind friends and family to keep you honest. It's much easier to lie to yourself at those times your body overloads your head with constant cravings for nicotine, and your head fills with thoughts about just one to get past the sticking point. There's well-known film footage of an experiment showing a lab rat that is given the choice between pressing a button for food or pressing a different button for cocaine. The rat chooses the cocaine over and over until it starves to death. Don't become the dead rat. You're better than that. I made it work because if I wanted to be with Linda, I had to make it work. She could no longer tolerate secondhand smoke, and she was certainly not going to resume smoking because it would certainly kill her. The choices were simple. Making those choices actually happen was difficult. Most difficult was the first hour in the morning. In that first hour, I could easily smoke 5 to 7 cigarettes as I had my coffee. It was frighteningly easy to do. Now, when I think of how much poison I was sucking into my lungs, it makes me shiver. Thanks for watching this chapter of my book. Come back for the next chapter and to continue on the road of quitting at your own speed like I did. And please, let us know how you're doing and if we are helping you to stop smoking once and for all.